The crater of Cotopaxi, like that of Tenerife, was surrounded by a circular wall, which the travelers were unable to scale. For unlike the crater of Tenerife, it had no opening. The lava, which had poured over its horrible brink, had never yet been made a breach of it. Indeed, they found it difficult to attain even the inferior boundary of perpetual snow, so they were reluctantly compelled to descend. Humboldt made two sketches of the volcano, one at Sunninguaucu from a ridge of polyrific mountains which joined the Cotopaxi to the Nevada of Quinladana, a southern view of the crater near the limits of eternal snow, the other a westerly view from the terrace of a beautiful country house belonging to his friend, the Marquis of Meneza, with whom he occasionally lodged during his residence in Quito. On the 22nd of June, the birthday of his brother Humboldt, commenced his ascent of Chimborazo, accompanied by Bonpland and Carlos de Montofar, a young Spanish naturalist. They started from the plain of Tapia, at an elevation of over 9,000 feet. This arid tableland was near the village of Lichen, the ancient residence of the sovereigns of Quito. From Lichen to the summit of Chimborazo was nearly 5 leagues in a straight line. They followed the plain, leaving behind them groups of Indians bound to the market of Lichen. Slowly ascending, halted for the night at the little village of Clipi. They were now at the foot of Chimborazo. It rose before them stupendously in the light of the setting sun. The foreground was veiled in the vaporous dimness that striped the lower strata of the air. But as they cast their eyes toward the summit, it detached itself from the deep blue sky. They saw above the region of ligneous plants and alpine shrubs a belt of grass like a gilded yellow carpet. Beyond this was a region of polyrific rock, and beyond these rocks eternal ice and snow. As the earth below grew darker, the heaven above seemed to grow brighter. Their sight was dazzled with the refulgent splendor of the snow. Early the next morning, their Indian guides awoke them, and they began to climb the mountain on the southern western side, traversing the great plains which rose like terraces, one above another, until they reached the plain of Siskun, 12,400 feet above the level of the sea. Here Humboldt wished to make a trigonometrical instrument to ascertain the height of the summit, but it was shrouded in thick clouds from the time they caught a momentary glimpse of it through openings in the clouds, but the sky was gradually darkening. They continued to ascend until they reached the little lake of Yanacacha, a circular basin 130 feet in diameter. It was the most elevated spot yet reached by man on the ridge of the mountains, 3,300 feet higher than the summit of Mont Blanc. Here they left their mules. The barometer showed a height of 14,350 feet. Crossing the yellow belt of grass which they had seen over the night, they came to a region of agate. Here rocks rose in columns 50 or 60 feet high and looked like the trunks of trees, traversing the aisles of this enchanted forest of stone, over fields of new fallen snow. they gained a narrow ridge which led directly to the summit of Chimborazo, and by which alone they might hope to reach it, for the snow around was too soft and yielding to venture upon. The path became steeper and narrower, and at last the guides refused to go any further. When they were 16,500 feet high, all but one of them was left. Nothing daunted, however, the travelers went on enveloped in a thick mist. The path which they were ascending was in many places not more than 8 or 10 inches broad. The natives called it a knife blade. On one hand was a declivity of snow covered with a glassy coating of ice, on which a chasm 1,000 feet deep, the bottom of which was covered with massive, naked rocks. They inclined their bodies over this chasm, dangerous as it was, for they dared not trust themselves to the snowy pitch on the opposite side. Had they stumbled, they would either have been buried in the mingled snow and ice, or would have rolled headlong down the character of the rock, which was brittle and crumbling, the increased difficulty of the ascent. Here and there they were obliged to crawl on their hands and feet. The sharp edges of the rock wounded them, and they were left behind a bloody trail. They marched in single file, testing at their poles the stability of the rocks before them. This precaution was very necessary, as many of the rocks were lying loose on the brink of the precipice. Desirous of knowing how much of the mountain remained to be ascended, for the summit was continually hidden from their sight, Humboldt opened the barometer on a point where the path was broad enough to allow 2 persons to sit side by side. The mercury indicated a height of 18,380 feet. The temperature of the air was 98 degrees, and that of the earth 107 degrees. They proceeded for another hour and found the rocky path less steep. The mist, however, was thicker than ever. They now began to suffer severely from the extreme refraction of the air. They breathed with difficulty and what was still more disagreeable, felt like vomiting. Their heads swarmed, their eyes and lips bled profusely, and their eyelids and eyeballs were charged with blood. From time to time, great birds, probably condors, came swooping down from the terrible paths, sailing grandly away, and little winged insects resembling flies fluttered gaily around. It was impossible to catch them, owing to the narrowness of the ledge, but Humboldt judged that they were dipteras. Bonpland saw yellow butterflies a little lower down, flying very near the ground. Finally, the belts of cloud parted, and they saw on the sudden the vast dome of Chimborazo. It seemed near them, so near that in a few moments they might reach it. The ledges seemed too favor them by becoming broader. They hurried onward for a short distance, excited with the hope of soon standing on the pinnacle. All at once the path was stopped by a chasm, 400 feet deep, 60 feet broad. There was no way by which they could cross it. The difficulty was insurmountable. To tantalize them still further, they saw that the path went forward on the other side of the ledge, evidently reaching the summit. If they could have but crossed the chasm. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and they were benumbed but with cold. They were 19,200 feet above the level of the sea. The belt of clouds closed again, and the peak was lost. The mist grew thicker and thicker, and everything indicated a storm. There was nothing left them but to descend. Halting long enough to collect few specimens of the rock, they retraced their steps. A storm of hail overtook them, but as they descended into lower atmospheres, it changed into snow. When they reached the little lake of Yanakoka, where they left their mules, they found the ground covered with snow several inches deep. Before dusk, they reached the Indian village of Kalipi, and were entertained that night by the priest. So ended the attempt to scale the summit of Chimborazo. Not content with his defeat at Chimborazo and Cotopaxi, Humboldt visited several other mountains and volcanoes in the neighborhood of Quito. If he could not ascend them, he could at least sketch them, which was something. He visited and sketched Corazon, Ilinisa, and Cayabi. Of the various summits of the Cordilleras, the height of which have been determined with any precision, KMB is the loftiest after Chimborazo, from angles which he took on the exedu of Quito to observe the progress of the terrestrial refraction at different hours of the day. Humboldt found its elevation to be 18,700 feet. Its form, which was the hat of a truncated one, reminded him of the peak of Zolima, as he saw it looming around the forests of Quindiu. Among the many snow-clad mountains that surrounded the city of Quito, he considered it the most beautiful as well as most majestic, and it never ceased to excite his admiration when at sunset it threw its vast shadow over the plain. Ilinisa was grand and picturesque. Its summit was divided into two pyramidal points, which were probably the wrecks of a volcano that had fallen in. These pyramids were visible at an enormous distance. Corazon derived its name from the heart of its summit, which was nearly that of a heart. It was on its western Cordelia between Ilinisa and Pichinna. Borger and Condamine ascended this mountain in July 1738. We began our voyage, says Condamine, in his celebrated voyage to the equator. In very fine weather, the persons whom we had left in our tents soon lost sight of us among the clouds, which appeared to us only a mist from the time we entered them. A cold and piercing wind covered us in a short time with icicles. In several places we were forced to scale the rock by climbing our hands and feet. At length we reached the summit, and on looking at each other we perceived all on one side of our clothes, one of our eyebrows and half our beards stuck with full of small frozen points, exhibiting a singular spectacle. In one of the excursions to Riobamba, on the western slope of the volcano of Tunguranga, the travelers visited the delightful village of Penelope, where they saw a famous bridge of ropes. It crossed the village of Chambo, which separated the villages of Penipi and Guando. The ropes of this bridge which were 3 or 4 inches in diameter, were made of the fibrous parts of the roots of the agave americana, and were fastened on each bank to a clumsy wooden framework. As their weight made them bend towards the middle of the river, and as with it would have been imprudent to stretch them with too much force, the Indians were obliged, when their banks were low, to form steps or ladders at both extremities of the bridge. That which the travelers crossed at Penepe was 120 feet long and 7 or 8 broad. The great ropes were covered transversely with small cylindrical pieces of bamboo. These structures, of which the people of South America made use of long before the arrival of the Europeans, reminded Humboldt of the chain bridges of Bhutan and in the interior of Africa. Mr. Turner, in his interesting account of his journey to Tibet, gave the plan of the bridge of Chitutu near the fortress of Chuka, which is 140 feet in length and which may be passed on horseback. Travelers had often spoken of the extreme danger of passing over these rope bridges, which look like ribbons suspended over above a crevice or an impetuous torrent. But Humboldt did not consider the danger great when a single person passed over the bridge as quickly as possible. With his body leaning forward, the oscillations of the ropes, however, became very strong. When the traveler is conducted by an Indian who walks quieter than himself, or when frightened by the view of the water, which he sees through the interstices of the bamboos, he has the imprudence to stop in the midst of the bridge and lay hold of the ropes that serve as rail. A bridge of this kind lasted, generally in good condition, only 20 or 25 years. It was necessary to renew some of the ropes every 8 or 10 years. But in these countries, the police was so negligent that Humboldt often saw bridges in which most of the pieces of the bamboo were broken. On these old bridges, it was necessary to proceed with great circumspection to avoid holes through which the whole body might slip. A few years before Humboldt's visit to Benepe, the bridge of the Rio Chambo suddenly broke down. This was owing to a very dry wind having succeeded long rains, in consequence by which all the ropes gave way at the same time. By this accident, 4 Indians were drowned in the river, which was very deep and rapid. The ancient Peruvians constructed also bridges of the wood supported by piers of stone, though they most commonly satisfied themselves with bridges of rope. They were extremely useful in mountainous country where the depth of the crevices and the impetuosity of the torrents prevented the construction of piers. It was by a bridge of ropes of extraordinary length, on which the travelers could pass with loaded mules, that a permanent communication was established between Quito and Lima. After uselessly expending upwards of 40,000 pounds of sterling to build up a new bridge near Santa over a torrent which rushed over from the Cordilleras of the Andes. But we must not forget the various monuments of the ancient Peruvians visited by the travelers during their 9 months' residence in Quito, especially the Panasillo of Calo and the house of the Inca Guayacape. They came upon the singular remains in April, were their way to the volcano of Cotopaxi, and Humboldt made a sketch of them as they appeared. He found them in an immense plain covered with pumice stone. The Pensillo was a conic hillock about 250 feet high, covered with small bushes of molina and spirmico and cactus. The natives believed that this hillock, which resembled a bell, was perfectly regular in its figure, was a tumulus, or one of the numerous hills which the ancient inhabitants of the country raised for the interment of the sovereign, or some of the other distinguished persons. It was alleged in favor of this opinion that the Peninsula was wholly composed of volcanic rubbish, and that the same pumice stone which surrounded its bases was found also on its summit. This reason might appear little conclusive in the eyes of a geologist, for this back of the neighboring mountain of Tilipo, which was much higher than the Peninsula, was also covered with great heaps of pumice stone, probably owing to ancient eruptions of Cotopaxi and Ilasa. We cannot doubt but that in both Americas as well as the north of Asia, and on the banks of the Orthinus, mounds raised by men and real tumuli of the extraordinary height are to be seen. Those which are found in the ruins of the ancient town of Maniche in Peru are not much lower than the Peninsula of Callao. It is nevertheless possible, and this opinion appeared to be Humboldt the most probable one, that the latter was a volcanic hillock, to which the natives have given a more regular form. Ulua, who visited the peninsula, and whose authorities of great weight adopted the opinion of the natives, he even thought that the peninsula was a military monument, and that it served as a watchtower to discover what passed in the country, and to ensure the prince's safety. On the first alarm of an unforeseen attack, the Inca's house was a little to the southwest of the peninsula, 3 leagues from the crater of Cotopaxi and about 10 leagues to the south of the city of Quito. This edifice formed a square, which each side of which was 100 feet long. 4 great outer doors were nearly distinguishable, and 8 apartments, 3 of which were in good preservation. The walls were nearly 15 feet high and 3 feet thick. The doors were similar to those of ancient Egyptian temples. The niches, 18 in number, in each apartment were distributed with the greatest symmetry. The stone made use of its building. The Inca house was of rock of volcanic origin, a burnt and spongy porphyry with basaltic bases. It was probably ejected by the mouth of the volcano of Cotopaxi, as this monument appeared to have constructed in the beginning of the 16th century. The materials employed in it prove that it was a mistake to consider the first eruption of Cotopaxi that took place in 1533, when Sebastian de Balcazar made the conquest of the kingdom of Quito. The stones of the Inca house were cut in paraphyllidons, not all of the same size, but forming courses as regular as those of Roman workmanship.